This is Lecture 39, America in the Post-1991 World. I said after 2 terms of Ronald Reagan, a somewhat good American economy, the American people supported his Vice President George Bush Sr. became elected in 1988. George Bush Sr. would have a challenge in terms of foreign affairs as he would take America into the first Gulf War, also known as the first Iraqi War. Looking down at this map, Iraq invaded the defensive nation of Kuwait for its oil reserves. Iraq had a terrible dictator up here to the right by the name of Saddam Hussein. He invaded Kuwait. America was not alone. America and the United Nations went to defend Kuwait. We called it Operation Desert Storm. American military might caused this to be a very fast military encounter. This was taking place during 1991. However, after defeating Saddam Hussein, we put a lot of restrictions on him. We did not topple his government because that takes a lot of money and might. We protected Kuwait and we put all kinds of restrictions on him, meaning America and the United Nations, no-fly zones. He had used in the past poison gas against his enemies. We had also warned him that he could not make weapons of mass destruction. So we did not take Saddam Hussein out. We left him in power with lots of restrictions. Now later on, we're going to go back to take him out. That would be the second Iraqi war. This is the first one under George Bush Sr. George Bush Sr., economically, America is going to go through a recession between 1990 and 1991. Some pointed to the good times under Reagan and the amount of debt that we drew up, including the federal government. And now the recession, we had to pay it back. Because of their poor economy, George Bush Sr., when he ran for re-election, would lose to the Democrat Bill Clinton in 1992. He was the governor of Arkansas before running for president in 1992. The other important development in the election of 1992, a third-party candidate, which was rare in the modern era, which was rare after World War II. What was interesting about the election of 1992, an outsider by the name of Ross Perot, a businessman, an oil tycoon, ran under the party United We Stand to give people a third option. The winner, however, would be Bill Clinton. The Clinton presidency. A lot took place in the Clinton presidency. We said before that he opened the door to gays joining the military through the Don't Ask, Don't Tell directive. He would allow gays to serve in the military. They would not be asked, but at the same time, they should not tell anyone. A very controversial act that Clinton supported and Congress passed was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. This law, which he got passed along with the support of Republicans, NAFTA was a way of opening trade here in North America, lifting tariffs, taking away tariffs to make it easier for other countries in North America to buy our goods, for Mexico and Canada to buy our goods to make it easier. The reason behind NAFTA, again, was supposed to help industrial production, but some argued against it. Some argued, unions, for example, were against it. With NAFTA, it made it too easy for an American business to open a factory in Mexico and pay them less money. Nonetheless, a lot of Republicans saw the growth in business to it. Business leaders were behind it. So this was an important part of his presidency, the passing of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Now, in Congress, we would see opposition to Clinton and the Democratic Party. The Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, would motivate the members in Congress to sign a contract with America. There's Newt Gingrich and his contract with America. He was telling the American people that we, the Republicans in Congress, we're going to sign this contract with you. These are the areas that we want to go against the president. These are the areas that we want to push our government towards. And this contract of America was a clash between Republicans and Democrats. What was behind the contract? They promised Americans, we want to try to reduce your taxes, much like Reagan did. We want welfare reform. We want cuts in welfare. And we want to pay our debts, create a balanced budget. So that came out in opposition to Clinton's presidency. Now, economically, America did very well under Bill Clinton, who got elected for 2 terms. They were rather prosperous years in America. However, Clinton is also remembered for a presidential scandal involving an intern, this young lady here, the Monica Lewinsky affair. He had an improper relationship with an intern, which got national attention, which involved Senate hearings. And the House of Representatives, which the majority of them were Republicans, they voted for articles of impeachment. Now, when you vote yes for the articles of impeachment, it's to charge the president. It's not to convict him and find him guilty, but it's to charge him. He was formally charged with impeachment. Just like President Trump was also charged with impeachment. But just like Trump, he was not found guilty. The Senate is supposed to find you guilty. At the time, the Senate was dominated by Democrats. So it definitely left a scandal as part of his presidency. When it came to foreign affairs, remember the Cold War has now come to an end. So that's not dominating. When it comes to foreign affairs, it has to deal, of course, with Middle East. There's always the threat of terrorism. And in Eastern Europe, as the Cold War is ending, there's fights there for control. And Clinton did send troops through the UN to Kosovo, a nation in Eastern Europe where one group was using ethnic cleansing against another. They were trying to kill races of people. So he did send troops to Kosovo to prevent ethnic cleansing. Clinton served, again, 2 terms. The economy was fairly good. However, the scandal at the time would have a huge impact. In the election of 2000, the Vice President of the United States, Al Gore, would run for the Democratic Party. And George W. Bush, the son of George Sr., would run for the Republicans. George W. Bush promised to bring honor back to the White House following the Lewinsky affair. And George W. Bush, to many Americans, seemed more likable, which is really going to help his candidacy. In this election, we're also going to see a third-party candidate, a man by the name of Ralph Nader. He's going to represent the Green Party. This picture of him over here to the right. And with Ralph Nader running in the more progressive Green Party, we knew this would hurt votes for Al Gore. The election of 2000 would now become the closest presidential election in history. It was extremely close. So close that it's going to lead to a Supreme Court decision. Because a dilemma broke out in the state of Florida, in which initially the government of Florida declared Bush the winner, which means he would get all the electoral votes. The Gore campaign demanded a recount. They demanded a recount because Democrats in Florida were saying some of the ballots were not counted correctly. Some of the ballots were like indented but not torn all the way out, so they weren't being counted. So the Gore people demanded a recount, and both Democrats and Republican government officials went into Florida, as you can see to the right, to look at ballots and try to find the intention of these ballots. The problem with this recount is that it was taking a lot of time. This process of recount was taking a lot of time. And the Republicans appealed to the Supreme Court to accept the first declaration from Florida that George Bush was the winner. In the Supreme Court case Bush versus Gore, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of George Bush. That the recount had to end, it was taking too much time, and we needed to seat a president. They would accept the first action of Florida declaring Bush the winner. Interesting enough, following the recount and the full popular election, Gore actually won the popular election. But Bush was the president. George W. Bush would take on 2 wars as president. The first war came to us in the terrible tragedy of 9/11/2001, the World Trade Center, attacked by a terrorist and his operation. That terrorist over here to the right, Osama bin Laden, and his followers, his organization, anti-American organization, Al-Qaeda. When they attacked us at 9/11 in the World Trade Center, George Bush used all American forces to find him and his operation to bring him to justice. Al-Qaeda and bin Laden, however, looking to the map to the right, intelligence said he was all the way over into Pakistan, which is on this side. He was in Afghanistan. He was actually in Afghanistan. That his operation was hiding in Afghanistan. Afghanistan had a very militant, religious government at the time called the Taliban, who refused to allow any American troops or police into Afghanistan. So Bush really declared anyone who harbors our enemies becomes our enemies. So we went to war in Afghanistan. We went to war in Afghanistan for the purpose of capturing Al-Qaeda. And by taking out their government, we had to help Afghanistan rebuild. And that's why look at the length of time that we had American troops in Afghanistan. This was a war on terror. It was a war to capture bin Laden and to his operatives and Al-Qaeda. And then it became a war of replacing the Taliban as the leaders of Afghanistan. It would be a very costly war that some would criticize for the cost involved, and a war in which American lives would be taken. Another way that the 9/11 impacted us, Congress passed the Patriot Act in 2001. It gave police in America more access to our private lives. More access like phone wires, phone taps of those that were suspicious of terrorist activity. Which is another controversial note because a lot of Americans love their constitutional rights to privacy. With the Patriot Act, it gave the police more power to investigate private citizens, to infringe on our privacy. So this was one war which we engaged in under George W. Bush. And of course, wars are expensive. And then we engaged in a second war in Iraq in 2003. Let's go back to Iraq. Saddam Hussein is still the dictator. Saddam Hussein was breaking his agreement with the United Nations. He was not allowing inspectors into Iraq to look at all facilities. This was greatly upsetting to the UN and to America. And then American intelligence told George W. Bush that Saddam Hussein was making weapons of mass destruction. We don't know exactly if it was, nuclear weapons or poison gas, etc. But our intelligence told President Bush, we believe he's making weapons of mass destruction. America appealed to the United Nations. We need to go in, replace Saddam Hussein, make sure to destroy his weapons of mass destruction. The United Nations would not agree to it. So America decided to invade Iraq in 2003 to take out Saddam Hussein. This would be the war known as the Operation Iraqi Freedom. We would invade Iraq. We topple Saddam Hussein. We were there for more than a decade again. A very costly occupation, Americans being attacked, etc. And this became a controversial act as well. It was an expensive war, and our intelligence came back with the evidence that we found no weapons of mass destruction. One can argue that Saddam Hussein was evil and he was up to no good, and we would eventually gone to war with him. But others said it was a war based on this lie of weapons of mass destruction. Economically, George W. Bush supported a big tax cut in 2001, following again that very Republican economic belief, give tax cuts as much as we can and people invest. However, Bush will be the president under one of our worst recessions in American history, the financial crisis of 2008. Economists argue that the reasons behind it, but of course, I don't know the reasons behind it, but we went into two very costly American wars that were very expensive. You can argue whether we had enough regulations in the economies. One of the things that happens, one signal of the financial crisis of 2008, many Americans lost their homes. Many Americans lost their homes as a result of the financial crisis of 2008. But this was done during Bush's second term in office. Bush served 2 terms in office. At the election of 2008, the Republicans nominated the congressman from Arizona, the war hero, John McCain. The Democrats nominated a young and inexperienced senator from Illinois by the name of Barack Obama. But he was very articulate and the first African-American candidate of the Democratic Party, of any party, to run on a major ticket. Because of the bad economic developments under Bush, the people turned to the Democratic Party and Barack Obama to win the president, first African-American president in American history, in 2008. A couple of his policies that come out a lot, that are discussed a lot. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009. It was a bailout, an economic bailout, money to save industries that were hurting because of the financial recession. The federal government gave money to banks, the automobile industry, and others to survive the recession. That was controversial. Some Americans thought that the banks, federal government had no business saving industries. It was an act of socialism, etc. But he got enough votes in Congress to pass the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, an economic bailout for some of our industries that were hurting during the recession in 2008. And the other landmark law that he passed was the Affordable Health Care Act. Because it was done under his presidency and under his, and it was his campaign promise, it got the nickname Obamacare. The Affordable Health Care Act was a national health care program. We never had such a thing before. We had something close with Medi-Cal and Medicare, but those are for certain groups. The Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare, was the first act of national health care, which his critics called a form of socialism. He ran on a campaign that health care was a right, not a privilege. That too many Americans were not going and getting healthcare services because it was expensive. Too many Americans were having financial problems by trying to take their family to see doctors. And of course, like anything this big, it's going to have its pros and cons that you can see. It had to be paid for, obviously, so it's a raise in taxes. If it required, it's called a mandate, it requires people to buy taxes, which a lot of people say was undemocratic. The whole idea was to make insurance more affordable for people. People could keep their children on their health care until they were 26 years old. It also said if you have a pre-existing condition, like you have something like asthma, and then you change jobs and try to go to another healthcare company, they would deny you many times because you're expensive. Well, Obamacare made that illegal. No one can deny you for previous healthcare conditions. So there's pros and cons, and you can see them right here towards Obamacare. And AP really does not require too many questions on recent events. I just highlighted up to Barack Obama. As you know, he served 2 terms in office. And in the election of 2016, we would have the first female candidate for the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton, but she would lose to the Republican, a man with no political experience, but a businessman, Donald Trump. That was the election of 2016.